Are we ready? Given India's massive energy requirements and its perpetual need to import more and more of its oil requirements, the entire issue of geosecurity. Can you do that again, please? Yeah. Okay. Given India's massive energy security requirements, its perpetual requirement to import a great deal of its oil requirements, the issue of geopolitics of energy in India and indeed around our region and indeed around the world is of primary concern to us looking ahead. There are lots of international players interested in what India does, the decisions that we take, and how we fulfill our energy security requirements. In very brief terms, the environment that India exists in now, from a security standpoint, and certainly from an energy security standpoint as well, remains quite challenging. We've all heard and read a lot about the Iran connection, the geostrategic importance of that India places in Iran, but the problems that we encounter because of pressures in that part of the world. What about China and the presence of China and the Malacca Straits and the fact that a large percentage of China's oil requirements actually sail through the Malacca Straits? India enjoys an area of strategic importance in the Bay of Bengal, and we have the ability of observing a great deal of maritime activity in that region. What about Burma, our neighbor, and Burma's availability of gas power and the competition of sorts in the future, more than now, between India and Burma for those gas reserves? What about the volatility that lies to our west in Afghanistan and the safety and the security of pipelines? Well, these are just a handful of issues when one looks at the geopolitics of energy in India and our neighborhood, and these are just some of the issues that we're going to be looking at in this session. Joining us to discuss this, G. Parthasarathy, former Indian ambassador, one of the finest minds that the Indian Foreign Service has thrown up. Mr. Parthasarathy has a range of interests in terms of international diplomacy and foreign policy, but he often sees diplomacy and foreign policy through the prism of security. And I think his perspective on energy security would be absolutely invaluable. Harry Dhaul, DG of IPEPI, the organizers of this event, always wonderful to have you and speak to you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Partha, if you can just start on your talk, about 10-15 minutes, you do a little question and answer, and then take it forward.
Basically, I'll talk about our energy needs of imports. We consume about 4% of world oil consumption, but we are the fourth largest importer of oil in the world, with a huge deficiency and need. Now, this oil mostly comes through from the Persian Gulf. 70% comes from the Persian Gulf, or the Arab Gulf, as the Arabs call it. The problem is the volatility there. Right now, you are having huge tensions between Iran on the one hand and the United States, Israel, and the Arab neighbors on the other. Iran is quite isolated, but yet we need Iran. So this is the dilemma. We need Iran because it's our only access to Afghanistan and to Central Asia. Therefore, I think what we need to bear in mind is that our diplomacy with these Gulf countries is important. But more important is the global energy scenario. After all, we are a part of that global energy scenario. Now, right now, there have been fears that oil prices will shoot up and to become unaffordable. But it will be, people would be happy to know that the energy situation is actually improving. The reasons are the huge discoveries of shale gas in the United States, the fact that shale gas is going to become important worldwide in the next 10 or 15 years. China is already looking at producing 15 million cubic feet very soon. And therefore, in North America, you're going to have a situation where the United States oil production is going up so fast, is going to equal that of Saudi Arabia by the end of this decade. So we are in for a comfortable energy situation, especially if the situation in Iraq should improve. Another important and recent development people have not noted, Israel and the Mediterranean. The Levantine Basin, as it is called, which is Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Greece, Cyprus, and so on, they have got huge deposits of gas and oil. So the situation is going to improve. Towards our east, Vishnu, the Chinese are virtually on the warpath with all their neighbors. In the South China and East China Sea, they've placed demands on their maritime boundaries which have no sanction in international law. So I think there is going to be a source of tension. And as you said, the Straits of Malacca is something they're looking at very crucially because the bulk of China's oil comes from the Gulf. So you're going to be into a situation where in the next few years, in the developed countries, which is United States, Canada, European Union, and Japan, oil consumption is actually going to fall. But the excess production is going to be gobbled up by largely Asia, and India and China leading in that. So I think we have a very good interest in talking to everybody. Even with the Chinese, we are cooperating when it comes to maritime security. But when it comes to energy, they need it, we need it, and we can't be, it's not a zero-sum game. But as I said, Chinese behavior causes serious concern. The other fact is that we are now getting much closer to our neighbors in terms of cooperation in energy. Bhutan, we are going to get the equivalent of 10,000 megawatts by 2020. We're doing extremely well in the process of getting started in an energy grid. With Bangladesh, we'll be supplying 500 megawatts of power to them. We're getting closer to Sri Lanka. We're building a 500 megawatt power station there in the Tamil areas. So it serves the political purpose of also helping out the Tamils. We are also looking at a 500 megawatt grid with a submarine cable through the Pak Straits from India, connecting the grids of India and Sri Lanka. You mentioned Afghanistan. Afghanistan, certainly, there is the pipeline for which we have signed an agreement which can bring in huge amount of gas. But it's politically very volatile, and we have to take that into account because on the Afghanistan route, it goes through Taliban-controlled areas, Balochistan, all these pipelines can get blown up. They are blown up in Pakistan. So, but nevertheless, we are going ahead with that. China is also coming in a big way. And the greatest competitor for gas are the Chinese. And I must tell you one thing, I've seen from our experience in Myanmar, which you spoke about, we, with great difficulty, got access to the offshore gas. Yet we were so bad and so slow in negotiating a proper pipeline or even aligning a pipeline that the Chinese came and took the gas. So I think we must bear in mind, you were talking about security, the Naresh Chandra Task Force, for the first time looked at energy security. So as being a crucial part, not just the military. If your security is the welfare of your country, how can you have it without energy or technology? So these are areas which government is looking into. There's a much greater focus on security. By and large, I would say, unless a war breaks out in the Persian Gulf, which you can't rule out, in which case you will have a disruption for about 3 months or 3.5 months, and oil prices will go through the roof during that period. I think by and large we can manage. Most important for us, I think, is the revival of Iraq. Iraq has a huge potential of going up to 8 to 10 million barrels a day, untapped, if they are allowed to grow on their own. And right now, unfortunately, the rivalry is not between Arab and Persian, but between Shia and Sunni. So you have an alliance strangely brought about by the Americans between Iran and Iraq, taking on the Americans and Saudi Arabia and the others. And that is a rather volatile political situation. One hopes the Americans keep out of it, and especially Israel and America don't take recourse to arms because of the Iranian nuclear program. So it's a complicated situation. In fairness to our government, and the Prime Minister is meeting the Iranian president, I think we've conducted our diplomacy with these oil-rich countries very well. ONGC is going out. It's gone to Russia, it's gone to various other places, it's gone all over Latin America, to Venezuela, to Brazil, doing reasonably well in Syria and Sudan. So I think we are looking outwards. But let me make one thing very clear to the audience here. We are amateurs compared to the Chinese. And unless we bring in the private sector in a big way, which we are not doing in this field, we're going to lag behind the Chinese.
All right, Partha, thank you very much for making those comments that you have. Just a couple of questions,
Yes.
And then we'll come across to Mr. Dhaul for his talk. What about the, you were speaking about the South China Seas and the East China Seas and, an active Chinese presence in this region. Now, we've read reports about how they object to our cooperation with Vietnam in searching for oil blocks in those regions, or oil blocks which have in fact been given to us to do exploration. Is energy security in the South China Seas a potential area of dispute between India and China in the future?
Look, Vishnu, I go beyond just energy. 40% of our exports go through the South China Sea, our trade. Because with the west coast of the United States, Japan, South Korea, China itself, major markets. So the Chinese once remarked that the Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. Mm-hmm. So I think we have an equal right to say the South China Sea is not China's sea. And what we are doing is in the East Asia Summit, we are working together with the Americans, with the ASEAN countries, to try and get China to behave normally with respect to international conventions, particularly the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, to which China is a signatory, and its claims are grossly overstated. In the case of China, they become very nationalistic, very jingoistic. You have to negotiate. But I would add one thing. With China in this form, it's not just energy security. Your maritime security has to be looked into. We are in the process of expanding our fleet, 2 more aircraft carriers, as you know. We will be having 2 nuclear submarines soon operational. So I think that gives a measure of security as far as the Indian Ocean and our oil supplies are concerned. But in an ultimate analysis, you will have to sit with the Americans, the Chinese, and say that the sea belongs to everybody. Right. And China can't claim that the South China Sea is China's sea any more than we can claim the Indian Ocean is India's ocean.
Yeah. How active has, we know as a fact that the Indian Foreign Service is understaffed at this stage. And our foreign policy needs and requirements and specializations are only increasing. Energy security is as important and valuable a part of international diplomacy today as pretty much anything for us. But it seems to a lot of people that our mindset when it comes to reconfiguring our foreign policy to meet these new requirements is perhaps a bit slow. There is a recognition, but do we necessarily have the skills? Do we have the numbers? And do we have a government mandated effort in the Indian foreign policy, in the Indian Foreign Service, to actually reach out in the manner in which, say, the Chinese are?
Look, the Chinese put in a lot of resources beyond just their diplomats. They develop business links directly, they develop links with the leadership. In most African countries, the Chinese make it by, quote unquote, looking after the leadership. So I think that's a fact of life we have to take into account. We don't have the resources, and let me tell you, we don't have the capabilities the Chinese have, either with regard to pipeline diplomacy or with regard to offshore drilling. But we are doing well. There are plans now to, the diplomatic staff is woefully inadequate. You won't believe it, our diplomatic strength is equivalent to that of New Zealand. Yeah. 1/5 that of Japan, 1/3 that of China. So I think you are right. We need to much greater strength than that. I have gone to the extent of saying that perhaps we need to have a system of having from the private sector specialists from the energy field to spend short times in our missions abroad so that they are able to render the advice. Geopolitics is very complicated. As I said, we have all the gas we need in Turkmenistan, yes, but getting it through Afghanistan is very difficult. Getting any pipeline through Pakistan when the Baluchis are blowing up Pakistani pipelines is difficult. And then we bungle like we did in Burma.
Yes.
So I think we are still going through a process of growing up in energy. But the fact of the matter is, the most important thing as I see is the government a year ago put energy security as important as the physical security of the country, and came to the conclusion that security is not just the borders, but it is the well-being of our people, and your economy can't grow without energy.
One final question to you. The United States, now being as close an ally of ours as they are, seems to still represent a fundamental threat to us when it comes to our energy security requirements, specifically from West Asia. And you were talking about Iraq. Now, going forward, I mean, isn't this one of the biggest challenges of our foreign policy?
It is, but I think Reliance did the right thing. They had blocks in northern Afghanistan, which is northern Iraq, which is Kurdish controlled. They've pulled out.
Yes.
The Americans have, oil companies have, despite objections from Baghdad, moved into Kurdish areas, which I think is very unwise. India, I don't think, firstly, we should get involved in messing around in other people's internal affairs, which we generally don't do. Also, we shouldn't get involved in this rivalry between Shia and Sunni, which is now growing. Make the best. In fairness to the Iraqis, the Americans, they persuaded the Saudis that please make sure that the Iranians get what they want as their demand from, as their requirements from Iran fall. So yes, our imports have fallen from 20 to 13 million tons over the last 2 years from Iran. And that's inevitable because we don't have banking arrangements to pay for it. We have one separate bank which has no exposure to the Americans. I think it's the UCO bank which deals with it. But one thing is very clear, as far as I'm concerned, the Americans will have to be told, yeah, we agree to all this. But in an ultimate analysis, as long as we have problems with Pakistan, if we have to reach Iran and Central Asia, we can do, Afghanistan and Central Asia, we have to do it through Iran. And I think by and large, the Prime Minister with this visit to Iran, we will be able to get something.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Parthasarathy. There will be questions at the end of the session, but Mr. Dhaul, would you like to just perhaps speak to us?
I think it's a shame that 60 odd years after our independence, we cannot even supply continuous electricity to our population. To my mind, energy security starts from there. And I think it's also a shame that we, after so many years of, shall we call it, development, are unable to sustain our industries, our entire economy, and insulate it from international pressures and development. So, you know, it's a situation where if I'm owning a factory and I'm now linked to a 15-day cycle of pricing of fuel, I really don't know what the cost of my product is going to be. How do I do my long-term planning? How will I remain competitive, etc., etc.? It is a fact that we are importing majority of our fossil fuels. But the question is, instead of looking at just this problem and sort of talking about it, what are the solutions in the long term? At the highest level, at one point I asked a question, I said, what's the energy security plan for the next 50 years? And the gentleman blinked his eyes once, twice, and he says, listen boss, we don't even think, I mean, we are just having difficulties planning for 5. So you have a really serious mindset issue on energy security as far as India is concerned. And then you go down the merit order, if you like, of what are the options we have as people. We've got 1.2, 1.3 billion people, and to my mind, culturally, we are as much aligned in the South Asia, much better aligned South Asia than maybe parts of China or Korea or wherever. So naturally, our problems seem to be common. Having said that, 1.5 billion odd people to rise from 300 kilowatt hours per head to somewhere around China's number of 2,000, 2,500, it's impossible. I say impossible because this land is ecologically not going to be able to support it. When you compare yourself to the United States, you realize that you're having 5 times their population size roughly and 1/5 the land mass. There's no land. So what are your energy options? Are you going to go in for run-of-the-river hydro projects? You start off with hydro because it's supposed to be the cheapest. Yes, to a large extent you can do something about it. But the moment you start talking dams, you have a terrible record for rehabilitation, resettlement, and people now with the latest difficulty in acquiring land and, you know, environment ministries and forest lands and all that stuff, it's impossible to set up a large hydro project. So what's the next option? The next option is coal. Now, you know, God has been so kind to us, whatever options we are having of coal are now stuck in a new toothpaste called Colgate. We're stuck with that. So nobody wants to take any decisions on coal. I'm not very sure what the scam is about. I'm not very sure whether there is a scam or not. But the point is, as far as the media is concerned and the people and the bureaucrats are concerned, there's a scam. So nobody wants to take decision on coal. What's the next option? The next option is you go for something based on gas. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out there is no gas for the future projects. You look at KG Basin, you look at what's happening with the Reliance's gas projects, the gas has faded out. I mean, they had 70 million, whatever it was, cubic meters per day, it's disappeared down to 30. I mean, we just keep bumbling on and on and on. I still remember when we scrapped the Dhaul project, so to speak, we also gave away the gas at $2.75 a million BTU, which was a 20-year contract. That same gas was sold by the Qataris for $30, $40, $50. They have gone and bought Harrods in London, whereas we are still stuck here having 18-hour blackouts. I mean, I think there's a need for as he very rightly said, there's a need for a policy and a foreign policy and a domestic policy to be realigned to figure out the long-term options.
May I add one more thing, Vishnu? Yeah. What is worrying to me in the energy sector? Two factors. One is the failure on the front of coal. You cannot be as dependent on your energy on foreign sources as you are today. India has coal reserves for 100 to 150 years. And yet our coal imports have gone up by 400% over the last few years. This is there's something wrong. And unless we get the coal sector, and I hope the political controversies are sorted out and we go about business, because in an ultimate analysis, there is no substitute for domestic coal. And the moment you have shortages, countries like Indonesia are going to raise their prices.
Right.
And the best is this. And the second thing is, and this I would like to make it very clear, over-dependence on equipment from China for the power sector is not in the best national security interests. And a government have taken measures like imposing now a duty, I think at 21%. I hope it comes in power, but really, does China or any other major power depend on outside help? The fact with China is there is no transfer of technology, and you can run into deep problems on spares and maintenance.
Right.
There is no alternative, one, to your power generation, and two, to your coal. Yeah. These two are, I think, to my mind, very crucial.
So, thanks. That really more or less completed my picture, but just to finish off this part of the... So you also have the other two options. Everyone talks about renewable energy, renewable energy. The unfortunate part is the sun shines only in the day in the 365 days. So that reduces the sunshine to half. Then the other unfortunate part is when the sun rises and the sun sets, for the first 4 hours or both sides, I get nothing, or very little amount of solar power. So I effectively get around 4 to 6 hours in a day, provided I don't have monsoons, right? So that effectively reduces me down to a plant load factor of about 10, 12, 14%. And I'm spending in solar power, I don't know, the latest numbers, 10 crores per megawatt or 14 crores per megawatt. Then let's look at wind. Now the beautiful thing about wind is that it blows when it wants to, and it's seasonal. So states like Tamil Nadu, for example, get something like 5,000, 7,000 megawatts of huge amount of surge in wind in the middle of the night, in the middle of the monsoon, when nobody wants electricity, everybody's sleeping or running away from the rain and sleeping. So what do you do with that electricity? So there are no storage concepts that are there in place. There is no strategic plan to store energy. And I hope that somebody today is going to take up the electricity storage option. There is no policy for it. Then you have the other option of looking at nuclear. Now, to my mind, on a visit, which is now 2 years old or 3 years old, the Prime Minister, just before we signed the America agreement, had gone to Trombay, and he had made an announcement that we'd set up 20,000 megawatts of nuclear power. Coincidentally, I happened to go there 15 days later, and on a very low-profile visit, I was chatting with some friends and some colleagues in the nuclear industry there, and they said, "Listen, boss, our problem is the government is not giving us money to expand our nuclear generating capacity the way it should. So what we have to do is we have to build everything internally, give it out to L&T and the others as far as we can in terms of subcontracting. And there's a limited capacity. And so the maximum we can do is 20, 30, 40,000 megawatts in the next 5, 10 years. I said, I want to ask you guys a question. What happens if you build 300,000 megawatts of nuclear power and sell it at 20 paise a unit? Because that's the cost. That's the variable cost. He said, that can be done, but we have 4, 5, 6 areas of bottlenecks in terms of engineering capacity, which can be outsourced. But somebody has to sit down and take that call. We've got everybody and his uncle, aunt complaining about the fact that, we don't have electricity on the one hand, farmers committing suicide on the other, but we don't want nuclear power. So what do you want? Do you want oil-fired power like poor Pakistan is suffering at 26 rupees a unit? Or what do you want? Or do you want power when the wind blows?
Yeah.
You want to have your cake and eat it too. So people need to sit down and figure out that this is no longer a theoretical problem of somebody else and it's nothing to do with you. It damn well concerns everybody in this country. So I feel that there has to be a drastic change. The Atomic Energy Act, Section 22, was supposed to be amended 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, nothing's happened. So you find that our options for meeting the unsuppressed demands of this country are not even on the drawing board. Nobody has ever told me in the last 22 years that I've been in the power sector that we have got a plan in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years to get rid of this power shortages for unsuppressed demand. Now, on unsuppressed demand, there's one more aspect. If you're going to go, as you rightly said, on coal, look at China. It's all right to say China's got almost a million megawatts of capacity, but look at the kind of problems they're facing from the coal, the acid rain and all kinds of environmental problems. In fact, Beijing, I don't know if you read those articles, it used to be impossible to move around in Beijing in certain parts of the year because of weather and the fact that the pollution was so high. Now, they're trying to fight that problem, but the fact is they're burning a lot of coal. Now, if you have also got international commitments to reduce carbon emissions on the one hand, you've gone and tied yourself up there. On the other hand, you haven't even started. So it's a very difficult situation and nobody is really thinking about it. In fact, Mr. Parthasarathy, I must thank him that we actually work on this initiative called the Asia Energy Security Summit, which happens once a year outside India, where we actually look at the Asian issues. You rightly mentioned Central Asia. There are issues in Central Asia where we have a huge amount of hydropower that is available at half cent, quarter cent. We're not able to get it in for ABC reasons, transmission lines, constraints, the Taliban, and I'm not political, so I don't know who these guys are, but they obviously have some issues. Then you have the gas pipeline. Now look at the Chinese. They built a port in Pakistan. I guess almost free. My Pakistani friends can help me. And they are now going to use that port in Gwadar to move their products up into China. They've done the same thing in Myanmar. They built a pipeline from Sitwe all the way up into, I don't know what that province is. You're more into China than I am. But
Yunnan.
Huh?
Yunnan.
Yeah, Yunnan province. So the gas goes up there. So you can see that we're just constantly bumbling up. We need the energy. Now we want to fight with China in Vietnam. We're not able to take care of Myanmar, which is right next to us. So now all maybe we're going to have 2 more aircraft carriers, 4 more, this thing, whatever, to protect what? Are you going to go to war? Is that the solution? Why? The point is, it's all right, World War I and World War II and the oil and the Middle East and all this, very nice and very interesting reading. But are you actually in that position to do that? And do you want to do that as a nation? So there are a huge number of issues in terms of energy security. And when it trickles down to the simple householder, all he wants is electricity.
Yes.
And I like the fact that Gujarat has done something very interesting. Every time I go to Gujarat, I get quite excited listening to the ground level people. What they've done is they've gone and separated the agricultural feeders from their other feeders. So what they do is they tell the farmer, my friend, you will get power from this time to this time. Fixed hours, no power cuts, continuous power. So he's able to plan. There are no suicides to my knowledge in Gujarat, in this count at least. Maybe other counts there may be suicides, I have no idea. Now what happens in other states is that the feeders are mixed.
Yes.
So while imposing power cuts on industry or agriculture or rostering of some sort, electricity disappears. You're not able to plan. You don't know what's going to happen. I need water in my field right now. I've borrowed from the banks. I've mortgaged my house. I've mortgaged the family jewelry. I've spent all my money in fertilizer and these newfangled micronutrients. For me, this crop is do or die. Now I need the water, and there's no electricity. So what do? I go and buy a diesel pump. Costs me 26 rupees a unit. I have to pay that 26 rupees a unit, get the diesel pump, flood my field, and perhaps survive till the next year where I can go further into debt. And finally, it goes into a spiral. This is not a good state of affairs. And it won't need to be Einstein to figure out solutions to this. It's not that difficult. It's just, as he rightly says, you just need to put your mind to it and get cracking.
All right, lots of important comments over there. A larger look at some of the issues within our country and how it ties up to our energy security requirements outside. We have a little bit of time, maybe about 10 minutes to take questions for our panelists this morning. Can I ask for a show of hands if there are any questions? Does anybody have anything to ask? And we'll pass the mic around. All right, go ahead, sir.
Rajigoran from India Smart Grid Forum. Harry, you rightly pointed out India should go for 1 million megawatt of nuclear. Nuclear is the only thing which for countries like India which can give energy security. People forget Fukushima happened, the reactor was designed in the 1960s. Those engineers had a slide rule, what a decent calculator. The latest nuclear missiles are several generations ahead. And the nuclear plants now in development doesn't even need a transmission system. Those are 20 megawatts, 15 megawatt, 10 megawatt kind of units which in a colony or a hotel like this can be buried underground 100 meters down.
What is your question, sir?
No, question is that nuclear is the answer for India. That's what that should be recommended.
I think I'll answer.
Before I give it to the expert, let me just give you my 2-penny wit, okay? I'm not an expert in nuclear, but I want to tell you one thing. Every country in this world who's developed made sure they had cheap energy.
I think basically with regard to nuclear, the capacity has to be built up. And it's going to be a mix of our own reactors and reactors we import initially. We should be commissioning our first fast breeder reactor soon. It will take you at least 25 years before you can make your fast breeder process self-sustaining through thorium. So the general analysis is your takeoff stage in nuclear production so that it moves towards say 25% of your power production by 2050 is around 2040. Yes, it is essential in a longer term to build this capacity because India has the world's largest resources of thorium. We can be self-sustaining in energy only through nuclear thorium. But this is a process which is going to take time, given the limits, as Harry pointed out earlier on, about the production capacity, the domestic production capacity, which we are building up. We'll have to wait for the first plutonium-fed fast breeder reactor to come up soon enough of 500 megawatts. And thereafter, as the fast breeder moves into a thorium cycle using indigenous thorium resources, that is a process which will take 20 to 25 years.
I just want to add to what you are saying, that please understand that this is one track we can do. We can also, as the government is talking about importing light water reactors from abroad. The problem there is what do you do with the spent fuel? So
I think in the case, we are being very careful in the case of spent fuel because we have a very poor, the Americans have very badly let us down with regard to Tarapur, where we've accumulated spent fuel. All future contracts will provide for reprocessing under international safeguards of spent fuel. In fact, if you want to run a large-scale thorium program, you need that spent fuel which takes off from reprocessed spent fuel. So I think we have got wiser after the way the Americans cheated on us on Tarapur which was signed in 1963, which incidentally, you mentioned Fukushima. It's high time we considered closing it down. Tarapur was got in 1963.
There's a larger issue over there. Next, anybody else? Go ahead, sir. We'll just pass a mic.
I'm Pramod Dev, Chairman, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. My first question is to Mr. Parthasarathy. That's regarding the shale gas which is available in North America. So what are we doing trying to see whether we could import this gas? Because it will change the international economics of gas to a large extent. And already there are many plants which were built for import of LNG. They can be easily converted into export of LNG. And the second issue, I have to join issue with Harry Dhaul. about renewable energy being not going to play any role. In fact, we have completed a study on the integration of renewable energy and the issues that you are mentioning. I think you will be seeing it tomorrow on the website, our website of CRC, the study, and FOR study. In fact, that will answer many of your questions. It's not that the wind blows when it wants to. We have to see how we can utilize that. And as far as the solar is concerned, again, one has to remember that we have got certain advantages, and we have to, in the long run, for energy security, you will find that the renewables are going to play a very important role. Thank you.
To the first question, we are in negotiations, I understand, with the Americans, because gas prices have fallen so heavily in the United States. It's much more readily available, except transportation costs on the sort of vessels you need for gas from that distance are prohibitive. But still, the economics of it is being looked into. It's not that it's been ignored. The second thing I would like to mention is we have only now, the Ministry of Petroleum, have come out with draft regulations for exploitation of shale gas in India. Shale gas has environmental problems and even safety problems. In the United Kingdom, there were fears that it could cause earthquakes because you drill so deeply into the ground and into the rock structure. So these are issues, and in the case of China, which has the largest shale gas reserves in the world, they are very fortunate because all their shale gas reserves are located in underpopulated or non-populated areas. In India, we'll have to go by a regulatory regime. We hope it will be a more simple, straightforward, and transparent regulatory regime whose broad framework has been published. But as I said, China will be producing shale gas by 2015. And that is going to be a game changer. Incidentally, also the Canadians have huge resources of oil in their oil sands. So I think that's why I said the global situation is changing. But unless we get our house in order, when we can't exploit coal, how are we going to exploit shale gas? You will get Parliament stalled for 6 years instead of 6 days.
Okay. Just one more question, a question more than a comment. If anybody has a specific question, to the gentleman over there. Yeah.
Good morning. This is Kishore from NTPC.
Could you speak up? We can't hear you.
Yeah, this is Kishore from NTPC. My one clarification from Mr. Parthasarathy regarding this FTA issue with US and India. So companies like GAIL having secured the LNG contract from US, 3 million tons, 3.5 million tons. Obviously, we are in the need of getting more LNG from US at a convenient terms. But the issue of these FTA issues between India and US, is it causing a problem? How this is being taken care by the government at the diplomatic level?
Yeah, well, I think, look, an FTA with the United States is going to take a lot of time. There's the whole question of our agriculture. The US has the propensity to drive our agriculture out of business. So I think, yes, it is under negotiation, but I don't think the absence of an FTA is in any way proving a hindrance to cooperation in any field, including energy.
Okay, one last question, if anybody, to the gentleman. Yeah.
I'd just like to add to what he said. The one quick thing that can be done is if you can bunch together South Asia as a bunch of customers, then we can have a stronger negotiating power with the suppliers. Mm-hmm. So that's a point we can look at very quickly. So instead of India going independently, Bangladesh and Pakistan and all, if we can bunch it together as a bunch of and ASEAN countries who are importing oil, then we can have a better negotiating price and perhaps make it more sustainable.
My questions, I'm Mr. B.K. Mishra from member OERC. My questions for the Parthasarathy. What are the diplomatic actions for the India to have a development of
So could you just stand up, sir?
I'm B.K. Mishra from member OERC. My question for Parthasarathy. What are the diplomatic actions for India for having a quick hydropower development in Nepal? Like Bhutan, so we have the agreement for 20,000 megawatt by 2020. With Nepal, because this Same thing, what is it for these actions?
Look,
Can I speed up these actions?
83,000 megawatts is Nepal's capacity, 42,000 megawatts is exploitable. You know, the Nepalese have a very bad experience with India in the Kosi and Gandak projects. They really believe it was a sellout of their interests, and I must tell you the general worldwide impression is we very shabbily undertook those projects. So we inherently have a less than positive image when it comes to hydroelectric projects there. Secondly, the Nepalese are highly sensitive. Every second day they will change their negotiating position. You have already the Mahakali Treaty, and if you get together the hydroelectric potential of Pancheshwar and Rapti, you'll really have a hydroelectric potential of about 25,000 megawatts. But it is going nowhere. And I agree with you, more imaginative diplomacy, getting the Nepalese to go and visit Bhutan and see how Bhutan has progressed and why stalling doesn't work. Perhaps our being less rigid on having foreign consultants and independent surveys of downstream utilization. Yeah, it needs more, we need to be more imaginative, but at the same time, dealing with the Nepalese is far more difficult than dealing with Bhutan.
All right, we're completely out of time. Thank you both very much for your views. I think if one is to sum up this session, it's important perhaps to get a reality check of where we stand, not just in the region, but also, as Mr. Dhaul was pointing out, about what our challenges are at home. We need to get a lot of things fixed at home first before we have a very ambitious policy of energy security or a realistically doable policy of energy security when we look at our immediate region. But policies need to be framed now, they need to be forward-looking, and they need to be looking at 20, 30 years into the future for us to come close to meeting what our energy requirements will be. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us and asking those questions. And once again, thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us. Thank you.